Welcome to Redefining Real Estate. I'm Rylan.
And I'm Morgan. Expect a mix of education, humor, and authentic conversation as we explore all things real estate.
Let's jump into today's episode.
All right, guys, today we're going to be talking about why you should keep your first house as a rental. So this episode was this idea was sparked by one of my friends from high school reaching out to me. She lives in a different area now, but she mentioned that she was considering relocating here in the next couple of months out of state. And we had talked about, what it looks like to sell and what other options she might have because she just purchased her house a little less than 2 years ago. So it's hard to sell your home within 2 years. A lot of equity may not have been gained, especially over these last couple of years. So that's kind of what sparked our conversation around this, and I think it would be helpful for a lot of people, whether you already own or are considering buying, to just consider what options you might have in the future.
For sure. It's honestly kind of cool that she thought of that idea. I don't know if it was her idea or if she was just kind of curious about it or if you even mentioned it to her, but I think if a lot of people kind of had the mindset of like, oh, I might be able to keep this and, have some tenants in it, maybe rent it out, it's kind of cool. So I think if a lot of people kind of had that mindset, we might have a few more real estate investors in the area.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that there's a specific type of person that this would be most beneficial for.
Yes.
So obviously, like I just said, right? She's in a situation where she hasn't owned her home for a significant amount of time, but she's thinking about relocating out of state. And I would assume she's probably not going to buy immediately when she's moving out of state.
Right.
So I think if you're relocating and in that position where, you have a good job where you're at, but you're not quite sure what your career would look like when you move / if you would be staying in that area long term, I think that's kind of a starting point for those people.
Yes.
But besides that, what other types of people or situations do you think this would be helpful for?
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be like the biggest majority of just casual non-real estate investing people. I met a couple a while back that they had a new job in Dallas, I think, and they just bought their new construction home 2 years ago. Literally verbatim what you just said, and they didn't know what to do. We ran some numbers. They definitely were going to be negative if they had to sell the home and buy a new one, and that was their main priority, is just not losing money in all of this. So they did end up renting out the home. I haven't really talked to them that much. Obviously, they're in Dallas now, a whole new life. So I don't really know how that's going for them, but they did have to go that route. However, they weren't necessarily looking forward to that. They kind of had to settle for it. They definitely would have preferred to sell the home and then move on, but they went that route just to save themselves some negative loss, and it's kind of where they're at now. Yeah,
that's the exact situation that my friend
Right.
was in. She was telling me that she was interested in selling, and I was like, well, have you considered renting it out? And she was like, I've looked into it a little, done a little bit of research, but I don't really know because I'm not super comfortable with that idea. I don't know enough about it.
Right.
So same situation. And I think what I'm hearing you say is the ultimate goal here is to have those people relocate and either not lose any money or, put things off for a little bit to where they can gain more equity by
Yes.
renting it out.
Yeah.
And then hopefully over the next several years can decide to sell it at that point. So it's kind of almost like, yes, you are doing some real estate investing, but at the same time, you're really just buying yourself more time,
Right.
and trying to have somebody else cover the note versus you having to do it yourself.
Yes, yeah, I think sometimes this can be definitely sprung on people. They may have not bought the home with the intention to rent it out, but I definitely do think that there's some people out there that buy their initial home specifically for renting it out later on. They may be living in it for now, maybe house hack a little bit, 1 or 2 bedrooms, and then, eventually buying their second home and then filling that home. I do think that that's a great strategy. I think a lot of people talk about it on the internet. Sometimes,
That's for sure.
sometimes a little far-fetched, but
Right.
I think if you're doing it by the book, I think it's a good space to be in for sure.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about intentionally planning for it is big. I think the type of person that would ideally be wanting to look into this is someone who maybe is single or has a small family and who is comfortable living below their means
Yes.
for a while, right? Because we all have this idea of like buying our first home and like having it be a dream home on an acre, like outside the city, barn
All the
dominium,
things.
you know,
Big porch.
big front porch, all these things, right? But the reality is we have to start somewhere, and if you can start with like the cheapest thing you can find, ideally like the ugliest house in the best neighborhood is what
Yes.
you are looking for.
Perfect.
Where you can live in it, maybe do some upgrades while you live there. You know, obviously nothing big, but I'm talking like painting, maybe new countertops, like mostly cosmetic stuff, landscaping, etc. With the mindset of like, okay, I'm living like so far below my means right now. I'm just trying to like build equity in this property, maybe live there a year, 2, 3 years, however long it takes for you to build back up your savings for another property. And then at that point, you can decide, you know, do I want to sell this one and roll all my equity into my next one? Or with how much I've been living below my means, should I hold on to this, have someone else pay for it for a while, and hold on to it as long as I possibly can?
Yeah, I definitely think that is the best mindset to have whenever you're buying your first home or your 10th home, whatever it may be. Really prioritizing just doing things that could help your resale. You know, obviously you don't need to go off into that whole avenue of things to do, but yeah, I think if you're always just kind of thinking of like, what can I do to maybe best maximize my profits here, or
Right.
make this, like, if you do plan on renting it out, make it more attractable to other people. As far as from a tenant purpose, yeah, I think that'd be good things to do.
Yeah, for sure. So besides the person who is relocating shortly after purchasing their home, or someone who is a first-time home buyer who is just trying to like get into the cheapest thing possible, is there anybody else you can think of that this would be ideal for?
As far as keeping your current home, buying a new one, and renting out your old home, I'm not really sure. I would say if you're trying to stay there and you're looking to like maybe house hack, maybe people that are super deep in like the community aspect of things, maybe they want to have some tenants like within the property that also can build some sort of small community with. But other than that, I mean, I'm kind of drawing a blank.
Yeah, I think that one option that is kind of along the same lines, but something that you touched on with like having other people house hacking within the same property
Yes.
is like maybe if you're a parent and you're purchasing for your kid,
Yeah.
you know, there are loan programs where you're able to utilize their first time home buyer status and get a low down payment and assist them with the purchase of that home. And then, you know, rent out the additional rooms while they're in college. And then once they graduate, if they stay in the area, they can stay in the home, or they can choose to move on to their next thing and you keep the property as a rental.
That's a very good point. Yes. Yeah. That's something that I don't think a lot of parents know that even exists or know how to properly utilize that strategy. So I think if all the numbers work, obviously, then yeah, that's a great strategy for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and talking about the numbers, I think that's one of the biggest things that people are concerned about. Like, okay, well, how can I even keep my house and buy another one? Like, how do I go
Yes.
about doing that?
Yeah.
And again, I think it all boils back to like, if you're living below your means, this is the ideal scenario for you, right? Because
Yeah.
ideally that means when you're purchasing the property, you're not overextending yourself financially. You still have money to save. You know, and your payment is at a amount that you're comfortable with. And typically, if you're comfortable paying that for that house and you're a single person or a small family, then like most likely you can rent it out for that price or maybe a
Yeah.
little bit more.
Yes, yeah. I think the biggest thing would just be able to afford those payments, right?
Yeah.
Living below your means is great. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't use the rental income to help with the mortgage payment, right? Like if you're going to say, yeah, I'm going to buy this next house, but I'm going to rent these out for $500 a piece, you know, each room. Can they use that to help qualify you, or
They can, but you have to have a lease in place, like a signed lease in place with
that's
the
what it was?
tenants.
Yeah. Okay.
And they only use, I want to say it's 75% of the total rent value that you're getting.
Okay, that makes more sense because I couldn't remember if it was like a scenario-based thing or if you had to have like an actual document in place. But yeah, that definitely helps having that in place, and it can kind of help the lender understand where you're coming from, because sometimes if you just say I want to take another mortgage, they may be like, what are you doing? So,
Right. Well, and the thing is, like, when you're buying your first house, again, this is like you're trying to get into the most affordable place typically. And so when you go to buy your second house, typically by then you've maybe had a promotion at work, or
Yes.
like you're kind of in a different spot than you were when you bought your first house, because maybe you didn't do this within a year or two. Maybe it took 5 years or 10
Right.
years, or however long it takes for you to kind of build back up your savings again. I think that's where that comes into play as far as like qualifying for another loan,
For sure.
where things are different now in your life, and you know you're going to have more money or more opportunity,
better credit, hopefully.
and hopefully better credit.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, is just having a lot of like more cash reserves. 6 to 12 months would be ideal.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, you have to plan for if the home does go vacant. Obviously, if you have certain strategies in place, that wouldn't happen, but you never know. And that's kind of the whole point of this, is just to plan the best you can and hope that you don't have to ever dip into those. But I mean, as a landlord or beginning landlord, like it's going to happen at some point, I'm sure you might be able to attest to that.
Yes.
But,
Yeah. I was actually talking with a friend of mine, Sarah, this past week. Shout out Budget Girl on YouTube and
Budget Girl,
Instagram.
yes.
Go follow her. But I was talking to her about a potential property that I was going to buy. But then I was like, I just don't know if I honestly am like comfortable moving forward, because I just like recouped my savings from this last year,
Right.
like my 6 to 12 month reserve.
Yes.
And I'm feeling like really good and comfortable right now, but then I would have to use almost all of that for the down payment on the next place.
Wow,
And I'm
yeah.
like, I don't know if I'm ready for that quite yet. And in her experience, she owns rental properties herself. She's a very conservative investor, and in her experience talking with other real estate investors that own rentals, like having a reserve of around $10,000 for your rental property is ideal.
Okay.
I would say I'm a lot more risky in that aspect, just because I work in real estate. And so
Yes.
I feel like I know people, or like I'll make it work however it needs to work.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have that much saved up for each of my properties, but having some sort of buildup of reserve, at least 1 or 2 or 3 months of your mortgage payment would be great, because
Right.
that way you have, some time to where if you don't have a strong rental market in your area, then you can have that money for when
Right.
it's vacant. And obviously, if you need help in knowing how your rental market is, reach out to a realtor that you trust. We're happy to help in Bryan-College Station. But yeah, what are some other things that you think would be important for people to, consider?
I think you touched on a big one. Kind of just to back up a little bit, just so I'm clear. That's $10,000 per investment property you own, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Just wanted to make sure I was understanding that right. Yeah, I think you touched on a big one as far as making sure you're in like a renter's market, or you're actually have a market to be in. That's going to be a big thing, and kind of just understanding like where your home may fall. That's going to be a big thing, because I mean, it's just, you want to understand what the rooms are going for, what the homes are going for, just kind of what your competition would be. And I mean, if it's nowhere close to what your monthly payment is, then it may be pretty hard to make this all work.
Right.
Like if you're paying $2,000 a month, but homes around you are only like $1,500, it may be kind of hard to find the means to cover that gap,
Right.
That's going to be a big deal for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's just something people need to consider depending on their situation, right? Because if they
Right.
are purchasing a home immediately after moving out of their first one, then yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
In the situation where they're not, and maybe they're relocating or renting for a while afterwards, so for some people it may make sense to pay that difference in what they're getting for rent versus
Yeah.
the amount that they have to pay. Because really, someone else is still paying $1,500 of the payment, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And of course, if you're in new construction, like things are completely different, because you have a lot less like maintenance costs, and you have warranties, and
Yep.
you don't have to necessarily plan for as many things to happen unexpectedly as you would with
Right.
an older home.
An old charming home.
Hey, hold on there. Yes, but yes, no, you're absolutely right.
As far as someone wanting to calculate their like the ROI, like what would be the main things you'd advise them to calculate on that number?
So first off, you have to just look at how much you put down for the house, right? Return on investment is all about how much did you put in versus how much are you going to get out.
Right.
So most people are putting 3.5% down on a house. Sometimes it's less because you're using down payment assistance, or, maybe you're a VA buyer or something like that. So if you look at how much money you're actually investing versus getting $1,500 a month covered, like usually the ROI is kind of crazy, because where else can you invest, we'll say $15,000, and then get $1,500 a month down the line?
Right.
Granted, it's going towards paying off the loan, so you're not like cash flowing every month.
You're not pocketing
but
that 15.
right, but you're gaining equity every month.
Yes.
And to be clear, we all know that like $1,500 a month mortgage payment doesn't mean that's how much equity you're gaining every month, right? Because you have taxes, insurance, your interest payments, which are usually a larger portion of your payment in the beginning of the loan, right? But you're gaining interest regardless, and you're buying yourself more time, which is really, in our market, the biggest factor, because we are more of an appreciation market than a cash flowing market.
For sure, and that's kind of like why someone would be looking to even do this if they've been in their home for only 2 years, right? It's just to buy themselves time, build equity, and not have to be negative on selling their home, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that's a big thing. What about insurance? You'd have to convert that somehow, right? Because you couldn't still have homeowners on there.
So you'd still have homeowners insurance, but you would have a different type of coverage. So they change it over to when you're a landlord to cover different things. But in my experience, the cost is pretty comparable to like when you're living in the home.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I think that, for someone who's considering the cost of this, again, like you mentioned, it's to buy yourself more time for appreciation.
Yeah.
And especially if you are someone who doesn't have a ton of like knowledge in real estate, if you ask like your parents or your grandparents, or like, I don't know, someone in your life who has owned multiple homes for many years, like the way they are able to upgrade into their next home is usually not by their savings. It's usually by selling the previous home that they lived in for how many years,
Right.
because it appreciated over time. And so the whole point of this idea is like you're putting that off as long as you possibly can for your first home,
Right.
because that's usually the one that you invest the least in for the down payment, usually the one that is the smallest, that can be rented out. Like it just makes more sense to do it for your first home than like your fifth home, right?
For sure. Yeah. As far as something like that goes, it's like, buy yourself time. What other things can you do like within the home to like maybe go from $1,500 a month and rent to like 16 or 17, like try and get a little bit more, not overcharge, but also not be like right in market line? Would you just say like repairs, cosmetic stuff over time, or what would you say?
In my experience, the thing that makes the most different is going to be mainly cosmetic stuff, but there are going to be things that you can't change about the property, which we touched on, right? So imagine location is ideal, and like all the other factors make sense, and you just have an outdated unit or an older unit. Paint it gray or white, paint it a neutral color, and update the flooring to where there's no carpet. That would be great.
Yeah.
And I think beyond that, upgrading countertops, painting cabinets, upgrading bathrooms, like those are the larger ticket items.
Right.
At the end of the day, I think if you make sure you also use a professional photographer when you get pictures of these places, that's going to make a huge difference. Like you can do all these type of upgrades with the home, and then when you go to take pictures, if you take them on your iPhone and you don't realize that it's important to have the lights on or the blinds open when you take photos, like that's going to attract a different type of tenant than having professional photos done, making the space look large, and just like having professional marketing.
For sure, yeah. You don't want your pictures to look like they're taken on like a digicam or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
As far as, what about like furniture? I know some people are against it and some people are for it. Would you ever, like if you just got some random furniture in your home that you don't really have any like super big like sentimental ties to, would you think that would be good to leave in the property, or would you take that and put it in your next home and save you the cost?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think it really just depends on what type of rental you have. I mean, if you have a property that is right next to a university bus stop and, you're renting it by the room, it might be beneficial to leave some of the furniture as long as it's in good condition. Because the type of tenant may be, a college student or someone who's looking for something really affordable as well, trying to get into the cheapest thing and not have to bring as much.
Right.
But beyond that, I would take the furniture. I mean, I tend to find like secondhand furniture a lot, but it's very intentional when you're searching for that furniture. Usually
Right.
you're looking for a certain look and quality to get for the cheapest amount. And so I also feel like I would want to take that with me because furniture costs are super expensive.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I had an old boss that I think he like inherited a property and just had a whole bunch of furniture that came with it, and he used that for his rentals. So it was kind of cool to see that aspect. But yeah, I think if you're the one like buying it and finding it and like going through all the like the hoops, if you will, to furnish your home, I think you would want to probably take it out of there.
Yeah, well, and depending on the furniture, you
Right.
just have to remember no one is going to take care of your stuff like you would. So, like, if you're leaving furniture in that place, you just have to basically say, like, I don't care if I have to burn this after
Right.
they, in a year after they move out, because
Right.
that's really the risk you have to consider.
Yes, yeah, and that was kind of his like viewpoint on it. He's like, I have no idea where any of this came from. I don't really care about it. Again, if I have to burn it,
Yeah.
who cares, you know?
Yeah.
So that in that aspect, I think it works. But yeah, that's an interesting one to kind of think about, just because I think everyone kind of have different viewpoints on if they should leave the couch or not, you
Right.
know? But
Yeah, well, I think just the risk overall of having a tenant move in, there are a lot of pros and cons to that. And I know a lot of people, especially who just bought their first home, may not be comfortable with the idea of even renting things out, which I think we can go over the pros and cons of renting a house out, on another episode and go more
Yeah.
into detail in it. But I think that, that is something that you have to do your own research on and be comfortable with before you can consider these things. Because I have a client right now who she had her house listed for a couple of months, didn't see a lot of activity, so she put a tenant in there.
yeah,
She told me that the tenant would be happy to move out like whenever we needed, even though she had just signed this lease like, a couple of months prior to me listing the house. And then I list it and we get offers within the first week, and then we're under contract, and then we talk to the tenant and she's like, well, hold on. I didn't say I was going to move out for free.
oh,
So now the owner and landlord is in a situation where she has to pay out the rest of the lease in order for this tenant to agree to terminate early so the next person, the buyer, can move in.
Oh my
And
gosh.
this is, a $10,000 expense plus, a $10,000 plus expense that she was not thinking she was going to have to take on. And it's just like, well, obviously the tenant was helping her with some monthly expenses, but also she never thought that she would be getting herself into this situation.
right. What would you say to someone that has no intentions of like being a real estate investor, but they're in a situation like the one we've been painting this entire time, like maybe been in the home for 2 years, not much equity.
Yeah.
What would you do to kind of help them understand what their requirements would be as a landlord? Because they may not be anticipating having to deal with any repairs or having to deal with issues. They may just want to kind of put a tenant and then tell them to do whatever they need to.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think for those people who have absolutely no experience, who aren't comfortable with the idea at all, who are like scared and nervous about it, number one, find someone who works in real estate that you know and trust and talk to them about it. Like, this would be someone who would tell you like, hey, it doesn't make sense to sell your home because you're going to owe someone else, thousands of dollars in order to sell it.
Right.
So like, you want someone who's going to tell you the truth, but also, and this is what I told my friend, like, we need to do some research and maybe find you a property management company that you can work with, that you can trust, and then they'll take care of everything. You don't have to worry about finding the tenant. You don't have to worry about managing it. You just pay the repair cost when there are repairs that need to be done.
Right. And then, what would like that, because obviously you have to pay them.
Yes.
What would that look like for like a first-time investor? Like, what would they have to prepare for?
So it depends, but typically a property management company will charge somewhere between 10 to 12% of the monthly rent on a monthly basis. So, $1,000 a month in rent, that looks like $100 per month that you're, paying them.
Right.
So it could be an additional expense that doesn't make sense. But if it gives you peace of mind, especially if you're not in the area anymore, you don't know anyone in the area that you can trust, then like, this could be a great option to, pay an extra couple $100s a month and just make sure that your property is being taken care of.
For sure, for sure. The other thing that kind of came to mind was like understanding the zoning laws and the HOA. Like, what if the HOA doesn't allow rentals or short-term rentals or whatever the situation may be? I think that'd be probably a good point to touch on.
Yeah, I mean, if the HOA doesn't allow rentals, you're SOL, you know. I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, depending on the HOA, right? If the HOA is very involved and they are keeping up with the restrictions and actually enforcing them, then yeah, I mean, you really don't have a choice.
Right.
Maybe you could have a close family member move in if you know someone, but if they're not allowing rentals, you know, then you can't rent out the property.
Are there any like HOAs around here that you know of that don't allow like long-term rentals?
Not in Bryan-College Station that come to mind, though I'm sure there are.
There's probably a few out there. I mean, there's gotta be.
I know that in a lot of the neighborhoods where you, build on land, like you buy 1 acre and then you build on it.
Yeah.
A lot of times in the restrictions, when you purchase the lot, they say like this property can only be used for residential purposes.
Gotcha.
So typically that means like, don't build a garage apartment and rent it out to a random person. But also usually that means like don't rent out your house.
Yeah,
also.
and plus too, like that monthly rent would probably be through the roof.
Yeah, I mean,
so it wouldn't really be even that affordable.
Yeah.
Someone that could afford that like monthly payment probably could be living in the house the exact same size.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of where it would come into play. And it's probably why that's written in there at some point.
Were you thinking more like on terms of short-term rentals?
Yes and no. I mean, both. Any sort of rental. I know a lot of places don't allow short-term rentals. That's a lot more common, I feel like, just because they may not want like different groups of people coming in and out all the time, which, I mean, I can understand if you're running the HOA. But, yeah, I haven't really heard of anyone saying like no long-term rentals. But, yeah, definitely more common to see no short-term for sure.
Yeah. And then what you mentioned about zoning. Yeah, there are zoning restrictions. Can you speak to those?
Yeah, I mean, the big one's going to be just no more than like 3 unrelated people, or some places are 2 or 4. Some properties can be more marketable if you can have, up to 4 or however many it may be. I know you'd probably have to look on a map to understand those, but that's probably the biggest thing that comes to mind for me. But anything to add?
Just that, yeah, I've had parents looking in this area and they're like, okay, well, can I rent this out? Or what are the implications of buying this property? Right. Especially if they're from a larger city or a more dense area where like the cities are extremely involved. I feel like in Texas versus northern states, like we're pretty lax when it comes to real estate most of the time, or more of I guess like you do you kind of thing. Like, yes. Yeah, if someone complains, we'll come and check it out. But otherwise, like they're pretty relaxed about it. But yeah, there are certain areas, certain neighborhoods that are restricted to no more than 2 unrelated occupants.
Yes.
Yeah, no more than 2 unrelated occupants in zoning for Bryan. I know in College Station there are some areas that are similar, but they don't call it the same thing. They have a different like terminology for it.
Yeah.
And then in I think in all of College Station, I don't know if all of Bryan, but it's like no more than 4 unrelated in a home. It's not supposed to be, at least.
Yes. So we've touched on the financial side of everything, what to do to make your property more marketable, understanding different zoning laws, HOA things. So let's say all this makes sense for someone and they're ready to like take action. What's going to be the first step in like finding a tenant, and like how do they know like what would like makes a good tenant or anything like that? Like what are they going to have to do to like actually make this plan like roll into motion?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it revolves around doing research in your market and seeing what's normal. I mean, if you are a first-time home buyer in an area and you're thinking about buying another one, the likelihood is you've probably rented in that area before. You know friends that have. And so you should know you should have the resources available to find out what is normal for rentals in that market.
Yeah.
I mean, here we have a ton of rentals, we have a ton of property management companies, and I feel like everybody that's renting knows like you have to make more than 3 times the rent. Typically you have to have a certain credit score or good credit, meaning like no previous like eviction notices that come up on your credit, or like no previous bankruptcies or felonies, or like, there's a multitude of things. But I think using research that you do in your market, you can just like replicate that for yourself. There are websites where you can run background checks and credit checks. I think the one that I use is called Rent Spree, but
Yes.
there are a ton out there. You just want to make sure that you do run background checks, that you do run credit checks, and if this is a situation where you don't know these people whatsoever, like you definitely need to do that. Actually, if you know these people, friends or family, I'm going to say you need to do that even more like strenuously. Like
Because
don't
they may
just
take
trust
advantage
anyone.
of it. They may take
Yes.
advantage of you being the landlord. They'd be like, oh, Morgan, like, we're friends, like, we're cool. You know, you never know. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I think this is, I mean, that's all like, so like, it may seem like invasive or a lot, but like, it's important because you're the one with all the risk right now. Like,
Yes.
You're the one that has to pay the note no matter what. If the tenants don't want to pay you and they just leave out of nowhere, like, you're the one stuck with the home. So, yeah, I think if you do your due diligence before and like screen them all and do everything you need to do, I think it just sets you up for the long run.
Right. And this is assuming, of course, they're going to manage it themselves. They're not going to
Yes.
use property management companies. But beyond that, having professional pictures taken of the house after you get it ready and it's vacant, ideally, like if there's no furniture, that would be ideal. But if you have to leave your furniture, like imagine like you're going to sell it and you're having pictures taken. You know, reach out to a realtor and find a professional photographer that they trust to take the photos. That's usually going to run you $150, $200. Like it's really
Yeah.
not that expensive for pictures you can use every single year over and over.
Yes.
And then honestly, you can list this with a realtor to get as much marketing as possible. If that's normal in your area, then I would certainly do that. Otherwise, you can choose to list it yourself on Zillow, Trulia, apartments.com. Just know that you're going to get like blown up on the phone if people are actively looking for rentals in your market, which I would hope they are. And you have to like individually create these ads.
Yeah.
Whereas for us as agents, we can upload it into our listing system and it syndicates out to every online website you can imagine.
Yes. And then we get to deal with those phone calls.
Right. We get to deal with the phone calls for you.
Yeah, I think that all kind of boils down to like being competitive in your market. You know, obviously you can take some photos and you can put it on Zillow and you can move on. But professional photos, maybe listing it with a realtor to get more exposure, that's just going to make you win the game. You know, that's kind of my take on it.
I think ultimately it lowers your risk because if you are professionally marketing the property, you're using a professional to assist you, like you're going to attract a good tenant,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Hopefully. Yes.
I think the likelihood of attracting a good tenant that way is much higher than if you were to take pictures on your cell phone, post on Facebook Marketplace, and then just like cross your fingers and hope for the best,
Yes.
you know?
So we've listed the home now. We've found the ideal tenant. How do we know what would be the good like documentation to even use to make sure that like they're not gonna screw me over or whatever it may be? Like,
Yeah.
how do I put in a lease agreement that like maybe the homeowner has signed lease agreements in the past, but like if they're not gonna use a property management company that uses their own or a realtor, I mean, are they just gonna have to hope for something, or is there a certain site you'd recommend to kind of build out their own lease agreement?
You know, I don't know off the top of my head any websites where like a landlord can go and find documentation besides maybe like Bigger Pockets. You know, that's a real estate investing organization and they have forums and all kind of stuff where you can do research. They may have some resources for someone like that.
For sure.
Something that I have done is looked like for my clients when they're unsure of how they want me to write up the lease even, I will go just do research on other property management websites, and a lot of times they will have templates of what their leases look like.
Exactly,
And so
yes.
you can look at those templates and decide what you think is reasonable, what you think isn't, and put that into place from there. I think you can Google like landlord lease
Yes.
in Texas or wherever state you're located and find that stuff though.
Yes, yeah. I was offering to write up a lease for a landlord of mine a little while back, and they were also saying like, yeah, that we were like looking into it, and they found some websites, and I checked them out just to see, because a lot of those stuff they may not seem like legit. So I was just kind of looking around. They honestly like the verbiage on there was pretty accurate. I didn't really see anything that caught my eye, but obviously I just used the one that we always use. But yeah, if you're looking to do that, I think there's resources out there. I would definitely just maybe have someone double check it, or a property management company be like, yeah, like do this, but don't forget to add this, or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. So, yeah.
Yes, if you have a realtor in your area that you know and trust, that should be one of the biggest resources that you use. They should be able to advise you to some extent on these things, especially if y'all have worked together in the past. And of course, if you don't know anyone and you're located in Bryan-College Station, we got you. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Do you think that there's anything else that would be important for people to know about this?
I would just say understand that if a water pipe breaks, that you're going to have to be responsible to get over there and get everything figured out. You're going to be responsible for the home still. It's not like they're just going to take care of everything for you. And just kind of go into it expecting that. You know, it's not every home's perfect. Everything has their issues, and at the end of the day, it's all about giving yourself time and building equity. So as long as you keep those two goals in sight, I think you'll be all right.
I agree. Well, if you guys have any questions or concerns about this topic, or maybe you're thinking about turning your first house into a rental and you're looking for some advice, feel free to reach out to us. We have our social media links down below, and we would love it if you subscribe to our channel to keep up with more real estate resources in the future.
All right, we will see y'all on the next one.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. We hope you found something useful, or at least had a good time listening.
Yeah, if you enjoy this episode, feel free to subscribe or share it with someone who might enjoy this content.
And if you have any questions or topics you want us to cover, reach out to us on Instagram. Everything will be linked below for you.